Good morning. Happy Thanksgiving. It's always fascinating to me when it comes to Thanksgiving, because for years Thanksgiving was always a huge Sunday in the church. And in this congregation, it's a low Sunday. And I think that's probably because, is everybody home cooking Thanksgiving turkey? Or is everybody away, going south, right? I've never figured it out. But it's nice to see you all. And I wanted to thank the folks who decorated the church for Thanksgiving today. It's always wonderful to know that people take the time to do that. My son Dan is here this morning, and his fiancée Sarah from Ottawa, so want to welcome them. And an interesting note with the connection with Thanksgiving, they are getting married next year at Thanksgiving, so I won't be here next year. Just so they're not getting married here. They're getting married in Ottawa, so I will be away next Thanksgiving, so just putting my notice in today. A couple of announcements. Somebody was going to do coffee this morning. They called me last night. They were sick, so Dave put the coffee on, but we need a couple of folks to help clean up after with coffee this morning, just to put the dishes away and stuff like that. So if somebody or a couple of folks could help do that, that would be great. Study group is continuing on Thursdays. We're studying the book, The Fifth Gospel, which is a kind of a murder mystery novel about the Shroud of Turin in the Vatican. So if you can connect all those things up in your head, I think you'll probably enjoy it. And in pleasant news, Irene Turney is a new great-grandmother. So I just wanted to announce that because... And apparently at this point it's still baby X because it doesn't have a name yet. So we're waiting on that. Anyway, it's Thanksgiving. Take a few minutes. Beautiful day today. Say good morning to each other.
Oh, now things are serious. Good morning, all. Well, welcome anyone who wants to join the choir. Thank you, Robert. Just come on up. We've got the peace that surpasses understanding as a theme this morning. And it reminded me of an old Sunday school song that has that in there, if you can think of it. So we're going to we're going to join in with I've Got Peace Like a River, 577. And then we're going to go into that Sunday school song that I remember. It's not listed here. See if you can remember. I've got the joy, 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 joy down in my heart. Where? Down in my heart. Down in my heart. I've got the joy, 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 joy down in my heart. Down in my heart to stay. Here it is. I've got the peace that surpasses understanding down in my heart. Down in my heart. Down in my heart. I've got the peace that surpasses understanding down in my heart. Down in my heart to stay. Thank you.
Wasn't there another verse that said, I got umption in my gumption? Yeah. It goes back a long way. So the theme this morning is the aspect of peace beyond understanding. Got a couple of quotes here this morning. The first one from Aldous Huxley, who was a utopian writer in the 40s and the 50s. And he wrote this, which I thought was kind of interesting because he wasn't a particular spiritual kind of writer. He wrote, "Uncontrolled, the hunger and thirst after God may become an obstacle, cutting off the soul from what it desires. If a man would travel far along the mystic road, he must learn to desire God intensely, but in stillness, passively, and yet with all his heart and mind and strength." And Karl Rahner, who was a German theologian, "The Christian of the future will be a mystic, or he will not exist at all." And Algebra Ezzetibegothic, who's also a theologian, but he's an Islam theologian, he said, "A starry sky is equally interesting to a scientist, a mystic, an ethics scholar, and a poet. Looking at the stars, each experiences something different, and each sees his own picture." Let us pray. The sun rises and it is light. Night falls and it is dark. Sow the seed and cut the corn, bear the child and build the house. Lay the stone and light the fire, cast the net and water the earth. Serve the guest and pay the price, cut the wood and pick the flowers. Make the wine and bake the bread, pour the wine and break the bread. Amen.
with the Taizé music, we try to stimulate a mystical experience right here, right now, through the repetition and the ever-deepening prayer, "Bless the Lord, my soul." Thanks, Lord.
Give us more has been the plea, more money, more power, more material things. Forgive us for not trusting in your promise of abundance. Forgive us, O God of mercy. Enable all to move forward, living within the abundance you have given, and leave fear of scarcity behind. God also provides loving forgiveness of our sins. Praise to God, the Creator, for abundant blessings. Amen. Be a gardener for creation. Dig, toil, and sweat, and turn the earth upside down. Seek the deepness and water the plants in time. Continue this labor and make sweet floods to run, and noble and abundant fruits to spring. Then take this food, drink, and beauty, and carry it to God as your true worship. So I think Maggie's going to read this morning from Paul's letter to the Philippians. So I wanted to that's a little loud this morning. I'm not feeling loud. Can you see where Philippi is on the map there? Okay, so look sort of over to the left and up at the top. It's in a aquamarine color, I believe, is the proper color for it. And one of the interesting things about this, it's one of the early letters of Paul, and Philippi is considered the first place in Europe that the gospel was ever preached. So it's kind of interesting by that virtue alone, because we always think of Rome and other places as being the first part that the gospel came to, but actually Philippi was the first place. So it's known as the seat of Christianity in Rome. And I think we have one more slide there. Nope. Oh, do we have one of the ruins? There we go. I don't know if you've ever been to Philippi before. I have not. But there are still ruins to this day of the first Christian church in Europe, which is actually in Philippi, not in Rome or anywhere else, that was built. Paul actually had 4 churches built in his time, early little churches to begin with, and then, of course, cathedrals were built up over the top of them. All that's left are ruins now because the Ottoman Empire came in and took over that end of the world and destroyed all the Christian churches in its time, and all that were left were the ruins. But it is kind of interesting to note that little off to the side was where the first of Christianity started. This letter that Maggie's going to read from has an interesting title. It's called Paul's Happy Letter. Because a lot of Paul's writings were a little stern, right? You're doing this wrong, you're doing that wrong. This is his happy letter, and he's exhorting people to be good and happy.
Rejoice in the Lord always. I will say it again. Rejoice. Let your gentleness be evident to all. The Lord is near. Do not be anxious about anything, but in every situation, by prayer and petition, with thanksgiving, present your requests to God. And the peace of God, which transcends all understanding, will guard your hearts and your minds in Jesus Christ. Finally, brothers and sisters, whatever is true, whatever is noble, whatever is right, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is admirable, if anything is excellent or praiseworthy, think about such things. Whatever you've learned or received or heard from me or seen in me, put into practice. And the God of peace will be with you all.
So I thought we'd do something a little different before we... Sorry, Dan. This was a last-minute thought this week. Thanksgiving comes and goes. Well, the year often comes and goes, and I don't get a chance, or I don't take a chance often to say what I'm thankful for with you folks. So I thought this year, when I was thinking about Thanksgiving, I would take a few minutes to express my thanks for what I'm thankful for in this congregation. Because that's, like I said, I'm in year number 5 now, so I have lots to be thankful for that you folks have put up with me for this long. So I just was thinking through about the kind of the things that I'm thankful for. So one of the things I'm thankful for, this is a smattering of the congregation. I know you can't see it if you go on the website, you can see it. In particular, thanks for all the folks who've been here since I've been here. The standard core of the congregation who've were here when I got here and have been here since and have remained faithful and true to all the work of the church. Basically, you've been the sort of lifeblood of the congregation, and I really, I've come to know you and appreciate you very well. Also, the new folks who've come along. Last year in the congregation, we took in 21 new members, and this year we're on the way. We have 28 new members already so far, 28 new folks who've joined this year. So, in terms of the congregation, it's been nice to have new faces, new people come, new people visit, come for worship, and stay. That's been great. And committee members, we never talk much about that, and I'm going to bug you one Sunday about joining a committee, but I thought this was really good. It says at the bottom, "Whew, that was close, we almost decided something." That would probably be the description of almost every church committee that's ever existed, right? And I've told you this story, I'm sure, many times. My first experience as a young minister in dealing with the board is I had to meet with the session because we were supposed to talk about baptism and how we were going to do things around baptism with new families coming into the church. This is 40 years ago. And I'm thinking I'm going to have this great rousing conversation about baptism with my new congregation and the session who ran the church. So for about a half an hour, I talked. Nobody would respond. And then after about a half an hour, somebody said, "Don't we need a new vacuum cleaner?" And then we had a spirited conversation for an hour on buying a new vacuum cleaner for the church. So I realize this is more true than it's not in some ways about discussions. Something else I've always been happy, and I even found a Peanuts thing to go with it. Happiness is singing in the choir. How could it be more true? I think one of the things for me that's been an incredible delight being here as the minister is Dan and the choir and the kind of caliber, energy, the excitement, and the variety of music we've had. I mean, it's been delightful, and I think it's something we need to celebrate all the time and continue to celebrate. I thought this was kind of funny. I did this is the church staff. I thought this is great, right? So I think that's supposed to be the minister at the front. He says, "This is the best staff. They follow me anywhere without question." And the person behind him, "Can't wait till I become the pastor." And the third person, "I'm going back to college." Fourth person, "I'm going back to my day job." Fifth one, "I'd follow him anywhere as long as he buys." Yeah, we're not putting, Courtney and I we're not putting any names on any of these. We'll just let it go. But it's been really good. We've had a few changes in staff, but it's been really, really good working with the people I've been able to work with here. They've kept the church alive and going because I don't know if you recognize this, especially the folks that have been around here for a while. I mean, when I first came here, it was fairly quiet during the week. And now it's literally busy 5 or 6 days a week. The church building itself is busy. And that falls on the staff to look after that, organize it, manage it. I mean, it's to the point where we're often sometimes double booked with people calling up and trying to find space. So, I mean, it's been a lot of stress on the staff. And the last thing I'm happy for is our outreach programs that we have continued and started. This is actually the third meeting of the Gap. And it started in the fireside room in our church. The first meeting had 3 people, and the second meeting had that many people. And now it has blossomed into this community organization that has 50 or 60 people. It's done Coldest Night of the Year already. We raised now, since GAP started in our little fireside room, we've raised over $100,000 in a year and a half. That's being used for lunches and suppers, and I think it's just very exciting to think that this congregation gave the permission and the genesis to start something in the community that wasn't just ours, that just invited the neighborhood to come in and work out of here. And that's our Coldest Night of the Year walk, which will be coming up in February again. So I hope that you will take advantage either to support or to come out and walk, because it was a lot of fun. So I just want to say thank you, folks. It's been a great year. It's been a great 4 years, and you deserve lots of credit. Thank you. So does anybody remember, this is just an aside, does anybody remember what production that hymn was in other than being sung in church? It was a musical production. No, should have been, but it wasn't. Older than that, from the 70s. Godspell, very good. And I remember it was the only time I ever felt cool for going to church. It was because I went to Godspell and they sang that, and I thought, that's a hymn. And I remember when I was in the military and we had a little chapel service at Thanksgiving, and we sang that hymn, and I said the same thing, and the gentleman who was the organist in the little chapel was actually an opera singer. And he'd been in Godspell, and he said, I have the music. So for the offertory, he pulled out the music from Godspell, like the reproduction of that, and he sang it for the like the Godspell version of it for the offertory. It was kind of funny, actually. So that always brings me back to the hippie days when I had long hair, and wore horizontal striped shirts and things like that. So don't do that anymore. So mystic peace, the idea of peace. When Maggie read the letter, Paul's happy letter to the Philippians, he's obviously in a very good mood. He's traveling. He's at the top of the Mediterranean, at the very peak of the Aegean Sea, new territory for him. He's found a group of people who are willing to listen to his message. He's not in jail. Things are good. And he's excited, and these people seem to share his excitement around this message he has. And he's encouraging them to seek peace through God. Do we have a peaceful slide up there? There we go. We thought that was a pretty good Muskoka image. What do you think? Huh? So the idea, Paul says, if you trust in God, you'll find peace. And he tells people, he gives them a little idea of how to do that. Right? The idea that if you put away your worries, that if you're faithful and diligent in the way you love other people, if you take away the things that you think are important and supplant them with things that other people find important, the result will be you will find peace. Now, how many people find peace in that? Oh, sorry, we're on ahead here, but that's all right. That's kind of frightening, I know, the juxtaposition. How many people find peace in that setting? Going down by the water. It's a pretty reasonable way to find peace, right? Are you able to let go of your worries in that situation? Are they able to evaporate, or do they focus more intently? No? They go away? Okay. Now, how about the other time I find is when you're going to bed at night? You worry more or less? More. It's a time, right? It's a thing. Yeah. Okay. So, we'll talk about worry. Do you remember this? How many people remember this guy? What's his name? Alfred E. Newman. How many people read Mad Magazine? Some of you did. How many of your children did? Okay. So what I always thought was interesting, other than it was a bit, I mean, if you look at it culturally, it is kind of fascinating, because what color's his hair? Right? So he's a ginger, right? So he's a kind of outside the margins, right? He's got freckles, and he's got that little gap in his tooth, right? So he's a product of the 50s or the 60s. Now, what's interesting about this, the magazine was called Mad Magazine, so for outside-the-box people. And his theme was, what me worry? I don't worry. So that made him mad. Right? You see the irony in what's being said there? Now, teenagers would never figure that out. Right? For teenagers, there would be no irony there. Right? But for the people writing the magazine and the adults who would look at that, the idea is if you're not worried, you're mad. Right? Like, I don't know how you folks work it out in your family situations. When I don't call my mother within 3 days, she calls me and says, "What's wrong?" Because apparently you don't call people when something's wrong. I always thought you called people when something was wrong. But my mother is convinced silence is the harbinger of evil. And I keep explaining to her. I mean, I'm almost 65. Mom, when I don't call, things are good. I only call when they're bad. But then I finally figured it out. It's her that doesn't call when things are bad. I have to figure that one out. So it's a reverse kind of psychology. I mean, she grew up in an age of worry, right? Things went bad. I don't know if do you remember this? Now, anybody who's my age may remember this. Do you remember practicing nuclear war drills? Yeah, right? Getting under your desk. I didn't remember it for earthquakes, but I do remember it. And you think about the idea of a 7 or an 8-year-old having that imprinted on their mind without a great deal of rationale or explanation. And the idea, as you grow up realizing that wouldn't have protected you anyway, right? And it's interesting to think back of how many things as children we worried about. It's no wonder we carried them on as adults. And even the climate change rhetoric now, and I call some of it rhetoric, I believe in it deeply, but some of the rhetoric is a panic rhetoric. An idea of people can't sleep. People can't live their lives from day to day because they're terrified. Right? It's an engage in a kind of a fear again. Somehow, and I don't know how we do it, worry has to be put in its place in our culture. And it is not being put in its place. So we go to Paul's idea that Jesus, belief in Jesus, somehow takes us outside of worry. And there's a lot of lovely pastoral images of Jesus. These ones I find particularly fascinating because they're imbued in the modern culture. If you go on the internet and just put in Jesus and children, you'll get literally hundreds of thousands of images like this, which I think is quite lovely. For me, one of the interesting things is, and I don't know if you listened to Michael Enright this morning, of course, driving in the car on the way up here, listening to CBC, and he's talking with Michael Corrin, and the idea of I preached about this 3 weeks ago, should religion and politics be discussed together? And I'm happy to say he said yes, so you heard it here first. But the idea Corrin was talking about, and I don't know if you remember much about Michael Corrin, but he was completely different 5 years ago. Hardline, conservative, anti-gay personality who went through a conversion and is going to be ordained an Anglican priest in the near future. So it's quite fascinating what he's gone through as an individual. But he talked about Jesus as being a revolutionary. And I've often talked about that myself. And one of the things that Jesus was a revolutionary was in Jesus' time, children and women stood outside the circle of men. That was just the practical way the society was organized. So the men talked about important weighty decisions and discussions. The women sat outside the circle and watched the children. And we find when we listen to the stories of the gospel, what happened time and time again was that Jesus moved beyond the circle of men, past the circle of women, into the circle of children, and brought them into the center of the circle. And always tried to make the children as important as the adults. In fact, when he told people how to be, he wouldn't say, be a good adult. He would say, try and be like a child. He would surpass all the adult kind of norms and say, be like a child. Be full of wonder. Be full of love. Be non-judgmental. Move past those things you've learned as an adult and be like a child again. And I think that is revolutionary in its time. I mean, it's still revolutionary in our day. Now, in our age, I don't know if you can read the writing on this. I thought this was kind of funny. This is a manger scene, right? And Mary is saying to Joseph, did you remember to bring the gender-neutral swaddling cloth this time? I love that. I mean, we are in an age now when we kind of are questioning and rethinking everything. I mean, it used to be when I had youth groups, and we would sit down and discuss personal identification. How do you know yourself as different from everybody else? Kids, teenagers would say, well, my eyes, my body, my gender, Right? These are the things I know about myself. And now if you sit down with a group of teenagers, those are all off the table now. Right? We're in an age where none of those things are permanent. So everything is at flux. And so how difficult it is now for people to come to peace even as adolescents, because they still struggle with who they are and all these multiplicity of changes. I'm not saying it's good or bad, but I'm just glad I didn't have to make those choices, or worry, or be anxious through those choices, or have somebody else tell me that I had to make those choices. Because the internet does that all the time, right? You're not quite right. You should look a little deeper. And so, I mean, even in religion, I don't know if you noticed, if you get the broad view, which is the replacement for the observer now, the broad view is the new observer. And you know, I have to make a confession here. I've always thought of myself as one of those people who always welcome new things. And I realize I'm not. I have crossed the threshold into seniorhood. What was wrong with the observer? Oh, it's perfectly fine the way it was. Right? See, Gene agrees with me. It had the obituaries right where they were supposed to be, so I knew if any of my colleagues had passed away. Right? It had articles on churches that I knew. I don't know what I'm reading anymore. Sorry, I'm getting carried away. So I'm reading it, and like seriously, I'm trying. I'm like, I don't know. The other thing is I'm a bit of an analyst when it looks at these things. So the first issue came out, it had 10 pages on the United Church and the rest of it on the world. The last issue had 5 or 7 pages on the United Church. And this one has 5. I knew this was going to happen from the beginning. So the United Church section will be shrinking and shrinking, and the rest of it's getting bigger. But it had an article on Jesus as non-binary. Read it. See for yourself. I'm not saying, not bad or good. It just confuses me. I'd love you to read it. You read it. I promise you, I'll preach a sermon on it. But only after you read it and make some notes, okay? Because I'm having a hard time with the gender-neutral swaddling clothes. So Jesus is non-binary is a whole other theological issue that I'm going to have a hard time wrapping my head around. But I will, I promise. Because, Gene, right, you and I can grow. Can't we? Yes, we can. I'm cutting right out of that. Okay. Let's get back to some peace. I need some peace. So, Gospel of John, John quotes Jesus as saying this. Peace I leave with you, my peace I give to you, not as the world gives to you. Do not let your hearts be troubled, nor let it be fearful. Does anybody know what occasion John is quoting Jesus as saying this? This is just when Jesus tells the disciples that he will be leaving them and that he won't be coming back for a while, and trying to encourage them to understand that means he's going to die. And they don't know where he's going, they don't want him to leave, and his response is peace I leave with you, I give to you not as the world gives you. Do not let your hearts be troubled, nor let it be fearful. Which I think is really an interesting thing, because again, it's this idea that fear and worry are the enemies of peace, that they sap the peace in us. And if you think of all the occasions in your life when you were at your worst in terms of not feeling peaceful, I can guarantee you were filled with worry or filled with fear. But that was the antithesis of your peace. So the other one, this is when now my son Dan, every so often sends me these comic strips. He texts them to me. I often wake up to them in the morning. So I told him I was going to use them occasionally. Some of them I literally cannot use in church. But this one I can use. So this is Jesus if he tried to feed the 5,000 today. He's got a loaf of bread in one hand and a fish in the other. And the people in the crowd are saying, I can't eat that, I'm vegan. The other one says, has that fish been tested for mercury? And of course, is that bread gluten-free? I mean, it is our age, isn't it, folks? Right? Right? There's nothing simple anymore at all. As I've said a couple of weeks ago, we have the luxury of worrying. Right? We no longer worry, am I going to be fed tonight? Right? We no longer worry, will I have a place to sleep tonight? We no longer worry, well, maybe some of us do, but are my kids safe tonight? Right? We have the luxury now to be the modern crowd. Right? Are things up to my standards? It makes it different for us than for the rest of the world. And I won't get into the whole Kurds and the U.S. and Turkey today, because we'd be here long past turkeys were cooked. So I'll just be quiet. So one more thing, I just thought this was interesting. Emotional pain and turmoil is a good sign that we have become attached to a person, a feeling, or a situation in an unhealthy way that is stealing our inner peace. And I thought that was really, really interesting. You probably do this. This is when I do it the worst, is when I lay down and I think that the day is over and I'm going to have some sleep, and then this one particular anxiety comes into my head and will not go away. And it just circles and circles and circles. And I chase it away with pictures of long piers with water and sun, or crashing waves, or stars, or all kinds of, but as soon as those things go away, it comes right back in again. And that's when I know that I have become attached to something that I need to let go of. Something has taken a hold in me or on me that I have to exercise. I have to let go. And I really think that Jesus was talking about that. I think he talked about with the disciples a lot, the things that get inside us that we can't let go of. Worry and anxiety and fear, kinds of things that get attached to us. And on Thanksgiving, you know me and the beach, the ocean, I get kind of stuck there. I like this because the image is kind of perfect like that, isn't it? But anybody who lives by the ocean knows that the next time the tide is high, that'll be washed away, which means it has to be written again. And then after the tide comes in, it has to be written again. And when I looked at the picture, statically it's pretty, but sort of metaphorically it means when we are giving thanks, we have to give thanks continually. It's not enough to just say thank you and then we've done our bit. And one of the methods to peace is a life of gratitude. I had a lady in my congregation in my first charge who had MS, and she could only move her neck and her head. She couldn't move anything else in her whole body. And this was back in, it was the early 80s, late 70s, and she had a little thing elastic thing she put over her ear with an earphone and a little pneumatic tube, and she could talk on the phone by blowing into the tube and answering it. And then she could hear in her ear. It was one of the first machines like that. And I would go to visit her, and of course I was 24 at the time. And I would go and sit with her because she couldn't live with her family because they couldn't care for her. And I was always smiling. And it used to make me crazy because I couldn't understand. How can you smile? How can you be cheerful when that's your life? And so I worked up my nerve one day to ask her, how can you be like this? And she said to me point blank, she said, if I couldn't be like this, what would I be like? So what would my family think of me? What would the world think of me if I couldn't be grateful for what I have? It marked me for life. I thought it was amazing. And it was the only thing that used to drive me crazy, it was like call waiting, because every time somebody called her, she would stop talking to me, blow into the tube. So my first idea of call waiting. But I thought, here is a woman who has nothing. She used to tell me she can't even move her hands to brush a fly off her face. But she never had a moment when she wasn't grateful for what she did have right there in the present. Have a great Thanksgiving, folks.
I'm grateful that you're listening to my cold-induced thankful song right now. So bear with me. Give thanks with a grateful heart. Give thanks to the Holy One. Give thanks because He's given Jesus Christ, His Son. Give thanks with a grateful heart. Give thanks to the Holy One. Give thanks because He's given Jesus Christ, His Son. And now let the weak say, I am strong. Let the poor say, I am rich, because of what the Lord has done for us. And now let the weak say, I am strong. Let the poor say, I am rich, because of what the Lord has done for us. Give thanks. You know, every Thanksgiving dinner is better eaten while not alone, so I'm inviting my dinner mates to come on to the table. Give thanks with a grateful heart. Give thanks to the Holy One. Give thanks because He's given Jesus Christ, His Son. Give thanks with a grateful heart. Give thanks to the Holy One. Give thanks because He's given Jesus Christ, His Son. And now let the weak say, I am strong. Let the poor say, I am rich, because of what the Lord has done for us. And now let the weak say, I am strong. Let the poor say, I am rich, because of what the Lord has done for us. Give thanks. Give thanks. Give thanks. What can I do? What can I do? What can I bring? What can I bring? What can I say? What can I sing?
Greater God, we offer these gifts in return for all the gifts you give us each and every day of our lives. We offer them from the work of our hands and the love of our hearts, and we dedicate them to the mission of your church in this world. Amen. Turn now to the pastoral prayer. O God, presider over the affairs of persons and nations, move us to thanksgiving, not because of what we have, but because of whose we are. Not because of the moment, but because of the eternity of salvation. And because of your concern for wholesome living embraces every person upon the earth, we pray for ourselves and for others. Amen. Before we sing our last hymn this morning, just want to thank the choir. It was beautiful this morning, Dan. Thank you for the introduction to it. It was great. Thank you very much. To you folks, have a wonderful Thanksgiving. As I always say on these occasions, eat as much as you want. I don't care. Have extra dessert, because I know I will. So enjoy yourself, folks. You can exercise next week. Final hymn this morning, 519, Sing to the Lord of Harvest. And now may the peace of God, which surpasses all human understanding, keep watch over your minds and hearts, bodies and souls, this day and forevermore. Amen.